Welcome to the Unveiled Epicheco's channel. Today we're diving deep into an unexplored historical mystery, one that drifts like low morning mist over the old town of Edinburgh, a quiet story that almost slipped through the cracks of time. The hidden life of a gentle Scottish giant who smiled at death, questioned everything, and somehow left the world kinder than he found it. And as the soft Highland wind begins to breathe through these words, let yourself settle, let your shoulders loosen, let the day fall away like an old coat. Because we are going all the way back to the spring of 1711, to a narrow stone house on the edge of the Nore, Loch, where a boy named David first opened his eyes to a world that would never quite know what to make of him. It is the 7th day of May, and Edinburgh is still half medieval, its tall lands climbing the spine of the Royal Mile like sleepy giants. The air smells of peat smoke and sea salt drifting up from. And inside number 9 Horse, in a modest second-floor chamber lit by a single wavering candle, Falconer gives birth to her second son, while the bells of toll the hour, little David arrives so quietly that the midwife almost misses the moment. As though even at birth he is reluctant to disturb anyone, his father John, a sober lawyer from the old border family stands in the doorway clutching a volume of Cicero, because books have always been his way of praying. And though he will die only 3 years later, leaving his children to be raised on a thin estate and a thick library, something of his calm courtesy passes into the boy who now blinks at the candle flame with eyes already too thoughtful for a newborn. The years slip past like pages turned by an unseen hand, and young David grows up between two worlds. The wild green sweep of the family estate at Down, in where summers smell of cut hay and heather, and the stern city where winter shutters rattle and the wind carries the cry of oyster girls through the closes. His mother, a woman of quiet Presbyterian fire, believes her youngest son is destined for the kirk. But by the time he is 10, the boy has already read farther than most ministers ever will, curled in the window seat at with, and his bare feet dangling above the cold floorboards, whispering Latin to himself while rain lashes the mullioned glass. And there is a secret here, one the family never speaks of later. At the age of 11, David finds in the attic a crumbling folio no one knew existed, a forbidden 17th century manuscript by a forgotten Jacobite scholar claiming that all human certainty is built on nothing firmer than custom and imagination. He reads it by candle stubs, heart racing, because the words feel like finding a door that was supposed to stay locked. And from that night forward, a gentle skepticism begins to bloom in him, soft as thistledown yet impossible to uproot. By 12, he is sent to the University of Edinburgh, climbing the steep college stairs in his plain black student gown while the city bells clang overhead. And there, amid echoing lecture halls that smell of coal smoke and wet wool, he falls utterly, hopelessly in love with philosophy. Professors notice that the quiet boarder's lad never takes notes the way others do. Instead, he sits perfectly still, eyes half closed, absorbing every word like rain into moss. Then vanishes to the Advocate's library to read until the candles gutter. He is 15 when he first writes in the margin of his own copy of Cicero, "Reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions," a sentence that will haunt him for the rest of his life. And by 18, the fire inside has burned so hot that something snaps. He cannot sleep, cannot eat, his hands tremble when he tries to write. His mother fears consumption, the doctors speak of the. But David knows it is simply thought devouring him from within. And so, with the calm determination that will mark everything he ever does, he packs a single trunk, kisses his mother goodbye, and sails for France to save his life by slowing it down. He is 23 when he settles in the little town of La in Anjou, the same quiet place where Descartes once studied with the Jesuits. And there, in a small rented room above a bookbinder's shop, with the gentle sound of the river flowing beneath his window and the scent of fresh vellum drifting up the stairs, he begins the great labor of his youth, a treatise of human nature, 3 volumes that will try to do for the mind what Newton did for the stars. He writes from dawn till dusk, breaking only to walk the leafy lanes where chestnut candles burn in spring and the bells of the Jesuit college call the hours. And in the evenings he plays backgammon with the local who has no idea he is losing to the most dangerous thinker in Europe. The pages pile up, on perception, on passion, on causation, on the self that is only a bundle of impressions tied together by memory. And when at last the manuscript is finished, he feels lighter, almost empty. as though he has poured his whole soul onto paper, and can now live peacefully inside the hollow it left behind. The book appears in London in 1739, and as he later jokes, falls dead born from the press. Almost no one reads it. A few reviewers call it nonsense or atheism. And David, now 28, does not rage. He simply smiles that wide, sunny smile that everyone who ever met him remembers, and begins turning the same ideas into shorter, gentler essays that people actually want to read. He moves back to help his brother with the farm. Riding over the rolling borders hills at dawn, his plain brown coat flapping, discussing turnips and metaphysics with equal calm. And slowly the essays begin to appear, on love, on tragedy, on the spleen, on refinement in the arts. And suddenly London and Edinburgh are talking about the cheerful Scottish skeptic who writes like an angel and believes in almost nothing, yet somehow makes unbelief feel warm. The 1740s and 1750s drift by in a golden haze of ink and friendship. He becomes tutor to a mad marquis, an episode that ends with David being chased through the house by a sword-wielding lunatic. Then secretary to his cousin General Clare on a military embassy to Vienna and Turin, where he wears a scarlet uniform embroidered with gold and dances at imperial balls, while quietly drafting the philosophical essays concerning human understanding in his head. He returns to Edinburgh plump, famous, and richer than anyone expected, buys a little house in James Court where the windows look out over the Nore, Loch, and the Castle Rock. And there, by candlelight that smells faintly of beeswax, he writes the political discourses that make him the toast of Paris, and that finally says in plain English what the treatise tried to shout, that we never truly see causation, only constant conjunction. That the sun will rise tomorrow not because logic commands it, but because we are creatures of habit, gentle, hopeful habit. Then comes the great history of England, 6 huge volumes written backward from the Stuarts to the Saxons because, as he says with a twinkle, I wanted to see where the mistakes began. He works in the Advocate's library surrounded by towers of vellum that smell of centuries. The same library where years earlier a shy law student named James will one day watch him in awe. And as the volumes appear, the whole nation argues over them. Tories hate him. Whigs love him. Churchmen denounce him from pulpits. Yet when they meet him in person, they cannot help liking the fat, smiling philosopher who refuses to argue angrily about anything, who listens to every objection with that soft Scottish voice saying, "Well now, let us see." Paris in the 1760s is the climax of the outward journey. He arrives as secretary to the British embassy, and within weeks the salons are fighting to have Bon David at their tables. He wears dove silk and a bag wig, dines with and plays chess with blindfolded opponents and wins, corresponds with Mad, whom he will later bring to England in an act of kindness that ends in tears and accusations of conspiracy. But through it all, he remains the same calm center, writing letters home that begin, "My dear mother," even though she has been dead for years. And when he finally returns to Edinburgh in 1769, he is 48, wealthy, beloved, and quietly certain that the great work is done. The last act is the gentlest. He builds a handsome new house in the new town on a street that will one day bear his name, though he will never know it. He walks every morning along Prince's Street before the elegant are finished, watching masons lay the pale sandstone that still glows today. He revises the dialogues concerning natural religion in secret, hiding the manuscript in case the Kirk comes after him again. And when the first pains of what will prove to be intestinal cancer appear, he treats them as just another impression to be observed with curiosity. He grows thinner, yet his cheeks stay round and rosy, his eyes bright, and friends who visit find him reading Horace by the window or playing whist with the same placid good humor, writing little autobiographical sketches that end with the famous line, "I am a man of mild dispositions, of command of temper, of an open, social, and cheerful." Altogether, a very harmless character. On the 25th of August, 1776, the end comes as softly as everything else in his life. He spends the morning dictating letters, eats a little soup at noon, asks his nephew to read to him from, and toward evening, as golden sunlight slants through the windows of his bedroom overlooking Square, he falls into a quiet sleep. His breathing slows, his hand relaxes on the counterpane, and David, who spent a lifetime proving that we can never be certain of anything, dies with the serene certainty that he has lived well and kindly, The last sound he hears is probably the cooing of pigeons on the roof and the distant clop of a horse on the new-laid cobbles. The last thought perhaps a gentle amusement that the great skeptic is about to discover whether he was right after all. They bury him on hill in a simple round tomb he designed himself, facing the Forth and the hills of Fife. And though the kirk refuses him a Christian service, half of Edinburgh follows the coffin, weeping not for the loss of faith, but for the loss of the kindest unbeliever they ever knew. And over the years, the wind and the rain smoothed the stone, while inside the city his ideas seep quietly into every corner of the world that is coming, into the American founding fathers who read him in Philadelphia, into Kant waking from dogmatic slumber into every quiet room where someone wonders whether certainty is really necessary to be good. And sometimes, on still autumn evenings when the drifts in from the North Sea and the along George Street glow like soft moons, people say you can still hear the faint rustle of a quill on paper, the gentle laugh of a large man in a dovecoat who never quite left, still smiling at the beautiful, uncertain world he loved so well. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. And so the quiet legend keeps growing, long after the coffin lid closed on that warm August afternoon in 1776, because David never truly left the rooms where people think. In the years that followed, a strange hush settled over the little round tomb on hill. Shepherds grazing their flocks at twilight swore that on certain evenings, when the sky over the Forth turned the color of pale honey, a soft glow rose from the grass inside the wall, not eerie, but warm, like candlelight seen through a distant window. They said if you stood very still you could hear the low murmur of conversation, a gentle Scottish voice saying, "Well now, let us examine the matter more closely," followed by easy laughter, the kind that makes even strangers feel they have come home. No one was ever afraid, the sheep never startled, the dogs lay down and dreamed. Down in the new town, in the handsome house on David Street that had helped design, wide windows, high ceilings, a study lined with empty shelves because he had given most of his books away, the new owners began to notice small kindnesses. A maid who had lost her mother found a volume of Lucretius left open on her pillow to a passage about the gentle atoms dancing forever, with a pressed violet as bookmark. A nervous young law student preparing for his first case discovered that whenever he dozed off in the big armchair by the fire, he woke with the clearest arguments arranged in his mind, as though someone had been quietly tutoring him in his sleep. The house never felt haunted. It felt tended, the way a well-loved garden feels tended long after the gardener has gone. Across the Atlantic, in the sweltering summer of 1787, something similar happened in Philadelphia. James Madison, locked in debate over the shape of a new republic, walked alone at dusk along the river, tormented by the question of whether human beings could ever govern themselves without the threat of divine punishment. He sat on a fallen log, opened the small leather-bound copy of essays he always carried, and read again the calm Scottish words about how societies are held together not by fear of hell, but by sympathy, conversation, and the slow growth of custom. A breeze stirred the pages. A single sentence seemed to lift off the paper and settle in his chest like a cool hand on a fevered brow. Custom is the great guide of human life. When Madison returned to the convention the next day, he spoke with a steadiness no one could explain, and the compromises that birthed the Constitution began to fall into place. Years later, when someone asked how he had found the courage to trust human nature so far, Madison only smiled and touched the worn cover of the book in his pocket. Back in Edinburgh, in the winter of 1792, a shy young printer's apprentice named James was working late in a freezing shop off the High Street, setting type for a new edition of the dialogues concerning natural religion that Snefew had finally dared to publish. The boy's hands were numb, his stomach empty, and he was close to despair. Around midnight, when the last candle was guttering, he thought he heard footsteps on the stair, soft, deliberate, the tread of a heavy man trying not to disturb anyone. The door opened by itself, though there was no draft, and a faint scent of coffee and fresh ink drifted in. On the composing table lay a single silver sixpence, enough for a hot meal and coal for the night. Never told a soul, but he kept that coin for the rest of his life, and when he grew up to become one of the great schoolmasters of Scotland, he taught generations of children that reason and kindness could live in the same heart. Even in Paris, where had once been the darling of the salons, the quiet echoes continued. During the darkest days of the Terror, a former pupil of, a woman named Sophie, hid in a garret with her little daughter, listening to the tumbrils rumble past. One night, half-mad with fear, she opened an old trunk and found a letter had written to her late husband years before, a letter that had somehow survived fire and flight. In it, the Scottish philosopher spoke of courage in the face of mortality with such serene cheerfulness that Sophie read it aloud to her sleeping child again and again, until the words became a lullaby stronger than terror. When dawn came, she burned every other paper she owned, but kept that single sheet. It traveled with her into exile and back again, and when she finally died in 1822, the letter was buried with her, folded inside the locket that held her daughter's curl. And so it went, century after gentle century. A medical student in Vienna in 1880 suddenly understood the limits of certainty while dozing over, and woke to invent a new way of listening to patients. A lonely lighthouse keeper on the coast of Maine in 1923 found a water-stained copy of the essays washed ashore in a bottle, and read it by lantern light until the storms no longer frightened him. A young programmer in California in 1971, struggling with questions of artificial mind, fell asleep on a beanbag with open on his chest, and dreamed of impressions flowing like gentle rivers of code. The ideas were never loud. They never needed to be. They moved the way himself had moved through the world, plump, smiling, a little short of breath, always ready to listen, never raising his voice, yet somehow leaving every room a little brighter, a little kinder, a little braver than he found it. And sometimes, on the rare nights when the northern lights quietly shimmer above Edinburgh, the old town and the new seem to breathe together, and if you walk alone along David Street or up the winding path to Hill, you might notice a faint warmth rising from the stones, the soft rustle of pages turning though there is no wind, the low, contented chuckle of a man who discovered that not knowing everything can be the most peaceful knowledge of all. So close your eyes now. The inquiry is over, and the answer was always gentleness. Somewhere David is still walking the misty streets he loved, carrying no lantern because the darkness never bothered him, humming a quiet Scottish air, and every so often pausing to leave a silver sixpence, a pressed violet, or a single clear thought on the windowsill of a sleeping world. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. And the hush deepens, the way it does when snow first begins to fall on old Edinburgh stone, soft, deliberate, erasing footsteps almost before they are made. Years after the gentle philosopher's breathing stopped, the servants who came to clear the house on David Street found something no inventory ever listed: a small cedar box hidden behind a loose brick in the study chimney. Inside lay a single sheaf of papers tied with faded blue ribbon, his own handwriting, but not the careful copperplate of his published works. These pages were hurried, blotted, almost feverish, written in the small hours when pain kept him awake. They were addressed to no one and to everyone. He called them fragments for a friend who may come after. In them he confessed, with that same calm amusement he brought to everything, that in the spring of 1776, when the illness first announced itself, he had walked alone to the top of Arthur's Seat at dawn. The city below was still asleep, wrapped in pearl mist, and as the sun rose over the Forth he had felt, for one startling moment, what he could only describe as a boundless benevolence without object, a warmth so complete that the old distinctions, self and other, reason and passion, even life and death, simply melted like sugar in tea. He wrote that he had stood there laughing quietly, because the great skeptic had just been given the one experience no skeptic could ever explain. He never spoke of it afterward, not even to Adam Smith, who visited almost daily. Instead, he folded the memory away like a love letter and went on playing whist and revising essays as though nothing had happened. The fragments end with a single line in larger, trembling script. "If this was delusion, I am content to be deluded forever." The servants, not knowing what else to do, slipped the pages into the fire. But the words had already done their work. The maid who fed the flames dreamed that night of standing on a hill bathed in golden light, and when she woke, she found a pressed sprig of heather on her pillow, though the windows had been shut tight. She kept it all her life, and when she was very old, she gave it to a quiet medical student who was trying to understand why some patients recover against all reason. He carried the heather in his pocket through the trenches of the Great War, and every man he treated swore the young doctor brought a warmth into the tent that no stove could match. In 1824, a young Charles, not yet 20, walked the same path up Arthur's Seat while visiting Edinburgh, and without knowing why, sat exactly where had sat half a century earlier. He opened a pocket copy of and read the passage about custom being the great guide of life. A sudden wind lifted the pages, and for an instant he smelled pipe smoke and fresh coffee, though no one was near. He laughed out loud, the way had, because in that moment the living world felt less like a puzzle to be solved and more like a conversation already in progress. Years later, aboard the Beagle, when despair threatened to swallow him whole, he would remember that wind, that scent, that inexplicable laugh, and the darkness would lift just enough to let him keep writing. In 1888, a 12-year-old boy in Missouri named Harry found a water-damaged copy of Essays in his uncle's attic. He read by moonlight on the porch while cicadas sang, and when he reached the line, "A wise man proportions his belief to the evidence," something settled in him like a compass finding north. He carried the book through every crisis of his life: farm failures, political defeats, the weight of the presidency. And when the doctors told him in 1952 that his heart was giving out, he asked for the volume to be placed on the bedside table. The nurse later said that on his last night the old man smiled in his sleep and murmured, "Well now, let us see." Exactly the way people said the Scottish philosopher used to begin every conversation. Even now, in the 21st century, the quiet ripples keep moving. A software engineer in Seattle, burning out on certainty, falls asleep with autobiography open on her phone and dreams of a round tomb glowing softly on a hill. She wakes calm, deletes 3 impossible deadlines, and writes code that prioritizes human ease over machine perfection. A Syrian refugee learning English in a Glasgow night class reads the sentence, "We speak not strictly and philosophically when we talk of the combat of passion and of reason," and suddenly understands why he still feels homesick for a home that no longer exists. A hospice nurse in Iowa keeps a dog-eared in her pocket and reads passages aloud to patients who are afraid. Almost always, their breathing slows, their hands relax, and they slip away with the faintest trace of a smile, as though someone kind has just assured them the next step is nothing to fear. And on certain misty Edinburgh evenings, when the along George Street blur into halos, and the castle sits above the city like a kindly old watcher, people still pause outside the house on David Street, now just another Georgian with a blue plaque, and feel, for no reason they can name, a little lighter. They do not know that the cedar box is long gone, that the fragments burned, that the heather and the laugh and the golden morning on Arthur's Seat have scattered into 10,000 small mercies across the world. But the mercy is there all the same, gentle, persistent, and perfectly content to remain anonymous. So breathe once slowly. The great inquiry is finished, and the answer was always the same. Be kind, be curious, and when in doubt, smile. Somewhere David is still walking the misty roads between an eternity, hands clasped behind his back, humming softly, leaving warm rooms and open windows wherever he goes. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. And the mist keeps moving, thin and silver, the way breath moves on a cold Edinburgh morning when the city is still half dreaming. In the winter of 1923, a young philosophy student named Elizabeth, sharp-eyed, fierce-hearted, not yet 20, stood alone inside's round tomb on hill. Snow had fallen during the night and muffled every sound. The only mark in the whiteness was her own set of footprints leading in. She had come to argue with a dead man. She had been told was the enemy of faith, the great solvent of certainty, and she intended to stand in his very resting place and prove him wrong. She opened her notebook, pen poised, and began silently reciting his arguments about causation, about miracles, about the self dissolving into a bundle of perceptions. The wind was perfectly still. Then, without warning, a single snowflake landed on the page exactly where she had written the word, necessary. It melted at once, leaving a small, perfect circle of water that blurred the ink. Elizabeth felt something loosen inside her chest, not defeat, not victory, but a sudden, startling tenderness. She closed the notebook, laughed once under her breath the way a child laughs when it realizes the monster under the bed is only a pile of clothes, and walked out lighter than she had walked in. Years later, when she became one of the 20th century's most formidable defenders of moral absolutes, she never told anyone about the snowflake, but she kept a small blank circle drawn in the margin of every notebook she ever owned. In 1954, a jazz trumpeter named Louis arrived in Edinburgh for a concert, and because he always did this in every city he visited, asked to be taken to the graveyard where the deep thinkers sleep. The guide, thinking he meant, started walking that way, but stopped in front of the little round tomb on the hill and said, "No, man, this one." This the cat who said, "We don't really know for sure, but we keep anyway." He took out his handkerchief, polished a clear spot on the snowy railing, and played a slow, aching version of West End blues that floated out over the Forth and made fishermen on the Fife shore pause in their nets. When he finished, he tucked a single white camellia from his lapel into a crack in the stone. The flower stayed fresh for days. No one could explain how. In 1987, an 11-year-old girl in a small Kansas town found a mildewed paperback in a library sale for 10 cents. She read it on the school bus every morning, hiding it inside her math book because the cover looked boring and the boys wouldn't tease her. One sentence lodged in her like a burr: "The feelings of the heart are the true standard of morality." She didn't know what to do with it yet, but she carried it the way other children carry lucky stones. 25 years later, Justice would mention in an interview that a single line from read on a school bus in the Midwest had taught her that empathy could be as rigorous as logic. She still had the tattered paperback in her Supreme Court chambers, spine broken, margins full of 11th grade hearts and stars. In 2020, during the long, quiet months when the world held its breath, a nurse in a Glasgow ICU played a recording of calm Scottish voice, reconstructed by historians from contemporary descriptions, reading the autobiographical sketch that ends, "I was a man of mild dispositions," over the ward speakers at 3 a.m. when the ventilators were loudest. She didn't expect anyone to hear it consciously, but the heart rate monitors slowed, the alarms quieted, and more than one patient who had been agitated for days opened their eyes the next morning and asked for water with a small, peaceful smile. The charge nurse wrote in the log, "Whatever that was, do it again tomorrow." And every year, on the evening of August 25th, a handful of people who have never met each other find themselves drawn to Hill without quite knowing why. A bookseller from Toronto, a retired physicist from Kyoto, a tired medical resident from Mumbai, a grandmother from New Orleans who just felt like taking a walk. They stand in a loose circle around the little tomb as the sun slips behind the Forth, and for a few minutes none of them speak. They simply breathe together, feeling the same gentle loosening Elizabeth felt, the same warmth Louis felt, the same unaccountable lightness that has been traveling outward in slow, perfect circles since 1776. No one has ever seen a ghost. No one needs to. The presence is quieter than that. The sense that someone somewhere is still smiling at the vast, uncertain, beautiful experiment of being human, and finding it, on the whole, rather delightful. So let the last of the day slide away. Let the questions rest. Let the gentle Scottish laughter settle over you like the softest blanket ever woven from mist and candlelight and ordinary, stubborn human kindness. Somewhere right now, a page is turning though no hand touches it. Somewhere, a snowflake is landing exactly where it is needed. Somewhere, David is tipping his hat to the evening star and strolling on, perfectly content never to know the ending. Good night. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. And the soft tide of that kindness keeps rolling, long after every witness has turned to dust and the city itself has grown new skins of stone and glass. In the spring of 2079, a maintenance worker named MacLeod is sent uphill to repair the motion sensor lights around the old tomb. The sensors have been flickering for weeks, triggering for no reason at 9:17 p.m. Every night. Is tired, her wife is waiting at home with their new baby, and she just wants to finish the job. She climbs the path at dusk, toolbox clanking, swearing quietly in Scots about council budgets. When she reaches the little round building, the sky is the color of bruised heather, and the fourth is beginning to catch the first stars. She opens the panel, finds nothing wrong, closes it again. At 9:17 exactly, the lights come on by themselves, bathing the tomb in a warm, steady glow. Feels the hair rise on her arms, not from fear but from recognition, as though someone has just rested a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, without words, "It's all right. Go home to them." She never files the report. Instead, she starts leaving a small white camellia in the iron railing every August 25th, because her grandmother once told her Louis did the same, and the story felt too good to question. In 2143, a school group on a history of empathy field trip stands inside the tomb's dim interior. Their teacher, a soft-spoken archivist projects a faint hologram of his face, reconstructed from portraits and letters, onto the curved wall. The children, raised on neural feeds and certainty algorithms, grow restless until the hologram smiles that wide, sunlit smile, and says in the gentlest reconstructed borders lilt, "Be a little kind, and I'll be a great deal happy." One boy, who has never known a moment without data, suddenly bursts into tears for no reason he can name. The others gather around him without being told, resting their hands on his back the way they have seen their parents do with frightened animals. When the class returns to the teacher notices the boy is carrying a single pressed sprig of heather. He swears he found on the stone floor, though the tomb has been sealed for centuries. In 2198, the last physical copy of the 1777 edition of the Essays, the one with the misprinted page that reads, "Custom is the great guide of human wife, instead of life," is rescued from a flooded archive in the former Advocates' Library. A conservator named Jun Park, working alone under ultraviolet light, discovers a faint marginal note in its own hand that no one has ever seen before. "To whoever finds this after I am gone, remember that the heart has its reasons which reason does not know, and that is enough." Jun sits back on their heels and cries quietly, because the sentence feels written directly to them across 300 years, the way a lighthouse beam feels written directly to a single ship on a dark sea. And in the year 2341, when Edinburgh's climate domes shimmer faintly above a city half sunk and half rebuilt, a girl with silver eyes and a name no one can pronounce climbs the hill that is now an island. The tomb still stands, somehow untouched by the rising waters, its stones warm even in winter. She has come because her implant keeps whispering a line of Old English she has never been taught. "Be a little kind." She stands inside the circle, listens to the wind moving through cracks that should not exist, and feels something settle in her chest like the last piece of a puzzle she didn't know she was solving. When she leaves, she does not take a photograph. She simply smiles, the same wide, sunny, slightly mischievous smile that has been traveling the world in slow motion since 1711, and walks back down to whatever future is waiting. The lights still come on at 9:17 every evening. The camellias still appear. The laughter still drifts across the water on quiet nights, low and warm and perfectly content never to explain itself. And somewhere in a fold of time no map has ever marked, David is still strolling the misty roads between certainty and wonder, hands behind his back, pausing now and then to leave a snowflake, a trumpet note, a pressed flower, or a single clear thought on the windowsill of a sleeping cosmos. Let it all go now. Let the last question dissolve like mist at sunrise. The inquiry is eternal, and the answer is always the same soft Scottish smile. Good night, dear traveler. Good night. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. And the hush becomes a kind of breathing, the slow, tidal breathing of something older than cities and younger than stars. In the summer of 2612, when the Forth has widened into an inland sea and Edinburgh's remaining spires rise like pale memories from the water, a salvage diver named Rowan discovers the little round tomb half submerged, its doorway just above the gentle waves. The stone is warm to the touch, warmer than sunlight alone could account for. Inside, the air smells faintly of coffee and pipe smoke, though no one has entered in centuries. On the curved wall, someone, no one knows when, has carved a single line in letters that glow faintly, as though lit from within. We never step into the same river twice, yet the river is always kind. Rowan, who has spent years pulling broken machines from the drowned city, feels tears rise without warning. They surface, remove their mask, and simply float on their back for a long time, looking up at a sky full of unfamiliar constellations, laughing quietly the way people have laughed on that hill for 800 years when something too large for words settles gently into place. In 2874, a child born on the Mars colony of Nu is taught to read using a fragment of text recovered from Earth's archives. The fragment is only 12 words long. Be a little kind, and I'll be a great deal happy. The child's name is David, after a philosopher no one remembers clearly anymore. Every night before sleep, the child whispers those 12 words into the thin Martian air, and the habitat lights dim a fraction softer, as though the station itself is learning to smile. In 3129, during the long silence when the stellar nets go dark, and humanity forgets it was ever one species, a lone archivist on a moon of 442b opens a vacuum-sealed capsule that has drifted between stars for 1,000 years. Inside is a single sheet of synthetic paper and a pressed white camellia that has not crumbled. The paper is blank except for a faint watermark, the outline of a round tomb, and beneath it, the almost invisible trace of a handprint, broad, calm, unmistakably human. The archivist presses their own palm to the mark. It fits perfectly. Across 4 billion kilometers and two hands meet, and the archivist weeps for a home they have never seen. In 4500-something, when language has become song and history is carried in the bones rather than in books, travelers crossing the glass deserts of old Earth still tell of a low green hill that rises from the dunes, untouched by erosion, where the wind sometimes shapes itself into the sound of gentle laughter, and the sand arranges itself into perfect circles overnight. They leave small white flowers there, no one remembers why, and when they walk away they feel lighter, as though someone has lifted an ancient burden they never knew they carried. And in the final turning of the wheel, when the universe itself begins to cool and the last light prepares to gather its skirts, there is still a quiet presence moving between the fading galaxies. Not a god, not a ghost, simply the soft persistence of a question once asked by a plump Scottish man in a dovecoat. Is it possible to live gently in an uncertain world? The answer, carried on a breath that has never stopped traveling, is the same as it always was. Yes, and it is enough. Somewhere in the long, soft dark before the next beginning, a page turns though no hand is there. A camellia opens in vacuum. A laugh low, warm, perfectly content, drifts across the dying embers of time. And everything that ever felt lost finds its way home. Good night forever, and good morning again. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. And when even the concept of when has grown thin and translucent, when the last star has folded itself into quiet and the great hush has become the only sound left, something still moves. It is not a shape. It is not a voice. It is the memory of a smile that once rested on a broad, kindly face in an Edinburgh study, while the candle burned low and the fourth whispered beyond the window. That smile drifts now through the long, cooling dark like a single white camellia carried on a river that has forgotten its banks. Wherever it passes, things that had been scattered remember they were once connected. A thought that was lost in the 23rd century finds the hand that first wrote it in the 18th. A kindness offered on a Martian dawn in 2874 meets the kindness received on Hill in 1776, and they recognize each other across the gulf as twins. A child who will never be born and a philosopher who has long since stopped breathing stand side by side in the same instant, breathing the same soft air of possibility. There is no time left for questions, yet the old habit of gentle inquiry remains. Is this the end? The smile answers without words. Endings are only customs we invented because we were afraid of the dark. And in the place where endings dissolve, the smile widens just a fraction, the way it used to when David watched a friend finally understand something difficult and beautiful. Everything that ever feared uncertainty feels, for one long, weightless moment, the perfect sufficiency of not knowing. Every heart that ever ached for proof is given the softest proof there is. The proof of a hand once laid gently on a trembling shoulder, of a laugh that refused to mock, of a life that insisted the world could be loved precisely because it could never be fully understood. Then even the memory of the smile grows quiet, not from absence but from completeness. There is nothing left to travel, nothing left to find, nothing left to lose. Only the camellia, floating forever on a river with no shores. Only the gentle Scottish laughter, now indistinguishable from the first sound the universe ever made when it decided to try being kind. And if you listen, really listen, in the final, perfect silence, you can still hear it, the same three words, spoken without sound, across all distances, to every sleeper who ever closed their eyes trusting that tomorrow might be bearable. Well now, let us see. Good night. Good everything. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you and see you again. And then the silence folds itself once more, softer than silk, warmer than any sun that ever rose over the fourth. There is no longer any after. There is only the place where the camellia drifts and the gentle laugh lingers, a place that was never separate from the first moment David opened his eyes in 1711 and felt, without yet having words for it, that the world was a strange and lovely thing worth treating tenderly. In that placeless place, every small mercy ever offered because of him, every sixpence left on a printer's table, every snowflake that melted exactly where it was needed, every heartbeat steadied by the quiet memory of a man who refused to be cruel even to ideas he disagreed with, gathers into one slow, radiant exhalation. The exhalation has no edges. It touches the child who will never be born and the philosopher who no longer breathes, and they are not two, but one quiet smile. It touches the trumpet note Louis played on Hill, and the whisper Elizabeth heard in the snow, and they are not past but present always. It touches the Martian child of 2874 and the Edinburgh maid of 1776, the Supreme Court justice on the school bus and the hospice patient easing into sleep, the salvage diver of 2612 and the archivist of 3129, and none of them are far apart. They are all resting, for one timeless instant, inside the same wide, sunlit, slightly mischievous smile. There is nothing left to resolve, no argument left to win, no fear left to soothe. Only the soft Scottish voice, no louder than a candle flame leaning toward a friend, saying one last time, across the whole length of everything that ever was or will be. Well now, it was a good conversation, wasn't it? And everything that ever lived answers, without sound, without motion, with perfect contentment. Yes, it was. The camellia drifts on. The laugh settles, gentle as the last note of a lullaby. And the universe, having tried every other possibility, finally chooses the one thing David always quietly recommended. It chooses kindness simply because it feels better. Good night. Good everything forever. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you and see you again. And now even the camellia no longer needs to drift. It has arrived. There is no river left, no shore, no motion at all, only the quietest possible blooming. A single white petal opening forever in the place where beginnings and endings gave up pretending to be different. Inside that petal rests everything that ever happened because a plump Scottish man once decided that being gentle was more interesting than being right. The boy who pressed a violet between pages in 1722 and the old man in David Street who smiled at death in 1776 are not separated by 65 years. They are breathing the same breath, right now, in the same instant that has always been. The snowflake that melted on Elizabeth's page in 1923 and the camellia Louis tucked into the railing in 1954 are not centuries apart. They are touching, edge to edge, completing one slow, perfect circle. The Martian child whispering 12 ancient words into red dust in 2874, and the Edinburgh maid finding heather on her pillow in 1776 are not distant. They are holding the same small, pressed flower between them, palm to palm across what never was a gap. Every act of kindness that ever borrowed courage from a sentence written in candlelight, every moment someone chose curiosity over fear because a Scottish voice once said, "Let us see," gathers here, weightless, luminous, complete. There is no more traveling to do. The smile, that wide, calm, sunlit smile, simply rests open, containing everything. And everything rests inside it, the way sleep rests inside the gentlest lullaby ever sung by someone who never needed to raise his voice. No more words are required. Only the softest possible hush, the hush a heart makes when it finally understands that it was always already home. Good night. Good everything. Forever and ever and beautifully enough. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you and see you again. And now come with me, very quietly, to the true last moment, the one no clock ever marked, the one that happened when everything else had already fallen away. It is no longer 1776, and it is no longer any year at all. The bedroom in David Street is gone. The city is gone. The stars are gone. There is only a small, perfectly still space, no larger than the circle a candle once made on a wooden table, and inside it 2 things remain. First, the faint warmth of a broad hand resting on another hand, the way rested his on young Adam Smith's shoulder the night before he died, saying nothing, only letting the silence speak. Second, the quietest possible smile, not on a face any longer, simply the shape a lifetime of gentleness leaves behind when it has nowhere else to go. In that stillness, the smile widens, just a fraction, the way it did when finally understood that the great inquiry was never about finding certainty. It was about learning to live kindly without it. Then, with no effort and no sound, the smile releases the last thing it was ever holding. A single, soft breath, the same breath the baby David took in 1711, the same breath the dying man released in 1776, the same breath every reader of his words has unknowingly borrowed and returned across centuries. The breath drifts outward, warm, weightless, complete. It touches nothing, because there is nothing left to touch. And in doing so, it touches everything that ever mattered. And that is all. The candle is out. The camellia has opened fully. The conversation is over, and it was beautiful. Good night, dear friend. Thank you for walking the long, gentle road with him. Now rest inside the smile that never really left. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you and see you again.